Tonight is December 5th, which is the Krampus Night, and this tradition is at the same time very contemporary and very fresh. Yet there's also a Byzantine chronicle from the 10th century which actually describes the Yule practices of some Swedish warriors, and they describe it in a way that really seems familiar. They were dancing around wearing animal masks and skins and clashing their weapons, shouting "Tool, tool," and some have argued that perhaps they actually shouted Yule, the Scandinavian name for the Christmas midwinter holiday season. In this video I'll describe this wild and animalesque Christmas ceremony, the Krampuslauf or Krampus Run, here on December 5th. And this is a kind of info that I'm trying to make available in the calendar of Nordic Animism that I published recently, and you still have the time to order it and get it before Christmas. My name is Rune Rasmussen. I'm a Danish historian of religion, and early career scholars such as myself, we live very precarious lives. So now I have a Patreon page for people who'd like to support my work to develop Nordic animism as a perspective on scholarship and cultural activism, and to create projects such as this animist runic calendar. And I should mention that, considering the time and competence and quality that went into this project, is almost a kind of a misanthropic initiative, even though we do take a prize for it. Right. Krampus is like an amazing phenomenon, because like, who would have thought that culture from the part of the world that gave us Heidi novels and lederhosen and yodeling would actually go and become seriously cool. And that's exactly what's happened today, because this Krampus complex is an absolutely marvelous tradition that comes from these alpine areas around southern Germany and Austria, and today is really going global. And I'll get back to that a bit later. And it's really a kind of performance of what is sometimes called the wild hunt, an idea with roots far back into prehistory, I would argue. The idea that the Christmas or Yule time holiday at the depth of winter is sort of brought by this procession or hunt of wild and monstrous beings like trolls and revenants and devils and animals, animal hybrids and so on. And they're often led by a figure that somehow personifies this holiday. And this is a general theme in Nordic animism, that a deity is moving through the landscape by an idol being carried, or sometimes like personified by masqueraders and so on. And this kind of personification, that is obviously an organic thing. It changes through the ages. In the Viking Age, the typical Yule masquerader was probably the god Odin, and maybe I'll make another video about that. But then through the times, different figures have taken this role, like the Yule goat is really important in Scandinavia, Saint Nicholas, Saint Knut, Saint Stefan, Santa Lucia, different saints, and a number of witch-like dangerous and wild goddesses are like female figures such as Luce, Perkta, Grula, Frau Holle, Hulda, Hartola, whatever they're called. And these figures are enacted in processions that have often functioned to bring light. The logic seems that the dark spirits in the darkest time of year bring light. And this behavior is also actually attested in sagas, this masquerader wearing animal skins. And up through the ages, these masks, or this masking persists. Often there have been these horned goat masks, and sometimes there's been straw, and making costumes of straw and so on, typically from a last sheaf, which then creates this almost hybrid figure, which at the same time is goat and human and harvest somehow, almost as a chimera of the human being and her primary relations like plant, crops and livestock and so on. So here on the night of December 5th, in parts of Germany and increasingly throughout the Western world, this devilish figure Krampus takes to the streets. And the celebration is held on St. Nicholas Eve, the evening before St. Nicholas, Santa Claus, on December 6th. And the reason is that the evening of December 5th, that like Jews, Northern Europeans always counted the day as beginning from dusk And this is the reason we also have Christmas Eve. The day begins at evening. So Christmas Eve at December 24th is really the beginning of Christmas Day, which we normally call December 25th. It's the same that when the Jews open the Shabbat on the Friday evening, even though Sabbath is actually Saturday. On the evening of December 5th, these Krampus demons will come through human communities. Typically they'll carry fire, and there's this idea that they come from the wilderness or from the mountains and so on. And the logic in this ritual is really ancient, the idea of bringing the wilderness into town. And it's rather typical actually of Nordic animism. At different times of year, people also carry flowers or leaves or branches of specific trees into their houses or communities for ritual purposes. But the amazing thing about Krampus is the way it's spreading around the world today. In the US, there's absolutely stunning tradition is seen more and more. In Holland, there are people who have started doing this. In England, there's a small town called Whitby with some really brilliant people who have managed to successfully make this a really big thing, the Whitby Krampus Run. And here in Denmark, I'm part of a group who's trying to reclaim the Nordic Yule tradition with inspiration from the German Krampus trend, you could almost say. And I think it's a really beautiful example of how traditions that are really ancient suddenly resurge and spread from one area and back into areas where closely related systems really used to be. Like in Northern Europe, we've seen this with the All Hallows traditions from the Americas, where they have these wonderfully expressive American forms such as Halloween, and we used to have it. I mean, I remember carving lamps out of beets as a child, but that disappeared. And then these kind of rituals, they live and disappear and re-emerge in new forms, sometimes also with new concepts and new motivations. So now we have Halloween in Denmark. My little daughter calls it Halloween. It's not called All Hallows in our own language anymore, but it's the same sort of way of relating to that part of the year. This also means that there can be new motivations, new concepts in it, but somehow there's also some of the same, the basic idea, for instance, with Krampus or Christmas, that there are monsters streaming through the dark time, and these monsters bring light. Perhaps they bring the holiday itself. Perhaps their wild behavior represent a shaking up of the world that sort of renews it somehow. Or they receive sacrifices or offerings, and people have been giving to the wild hunt specific things, alcohol or something like that. And there's also something about this ritual where a practice can be attached to different motivations. For instance, Krampus is carrying branches. If you look at Krampus on YouTube, they're punishing and beating the naughty children. And this is a very like Biedermeier sort of bourgeois morality, really. But these branches for striking, that motif is also found in other situations in Nordic animism, Nordic traditions, where it has like a purifying effect. In Norway, people after Christmas would go through the house and beat on all the furniture to clear out the dwarf's spirit. Associated with Christmas, it was important it was there, but it was also important that it was cleansed off somehow afterwards. In Denmark, you have a carnival tradition where masquerading children would beat on the bed of their parents with these kind of branches, with candy tied onto it, a kind of fertility symbol. And so this kind of motif, the symbol beating here, is an example that meanings can change quite a lot. And it looks to me like that when I look at social media, Krampus representations, that this very Victorian logic of punishing children is sort of being replaced with the different kind of naughty. Often you see these images of Krampus where there's an erotic spanking thing going on, and I think it's very characteristic of rituals that they can be linked with very different meanings as they live and change through history. So when I compare these 10th century Swedish Vikings with contemporary Krampus, then of course there is a significant caveat, and that is that we don't know anything about what they thought, the meanings that they attached to it, and that can be as different as purifying, punishing, and conferring fertility, or even more different. And one thing is for sure, and that is that it's changed a lot through the centuries. But still, this wearing of masks and animal skins, behaving wildly around midwinter, That in itself is probably an ancient behavior which is now resurging throughout the Western world. So take a look at the internet and see if there's a group of hippies somewhere in the area where you're living that are working to bring back to life this ritual that is so incredibly ancient that the Emperor Constantine of Byzantium might have seen Swedish Vikings perform it, an early version of it. You know, it might even be represented on Bronze Age rock carvings, you know. But still that it's so contemporary. I think when you look at the German versions of the ritual, it's so clear that a big part of its power comes from the fact that it's so contemporary. It makes me so happy to see the wild hunt enacted in a fire-breathing sports car. You know? It's very contemporary, and black metal music is played and so on. This is just an example of the many traditions of seasonal animism that you also find indexed in the Nordic Animist wall calendar that has been produced and can be ordered. You can still get it before Christmas. The calendar is almost made like a little lexicon where you can sort of look up all these kind of traditions on the back side of each calendar sheet. And you can contact me through the calendar page or the Nordic Animism Facebook page, and then you can, if you want to order and buy the calendar, and I'll send you the details. Great, but happy Krampus Night to everybody out there, and see you around.